Jon.
Is there a central theme that, could almost undeniably show that these have come from the same place? Do they share the representation of one God who is always, you're familiar probably with what the slaves did when they moved to, Cuba, Yoruba, and they had to change the names of theirs.
That happens
and
everywhere.
They match.
Yes.
Yeah, and they match these Christian God, but that's really this and stuff like this. So I'm just curious, is there any central theme that's...
The only central theme is that there is religion. But religion changes, because we know some of the early stories didn't have God. The early stories, in the beginning, there was nothing.
Okay.
Not even God. God hasn't turned up at this point. And there's light and there's sea. Often there's light and sea. And then mud appears via a bird, which is quite interesting. We can go back, because you talked about Noah, and we didn't even touch on that, but there's a bird in the earliest creation myths called the earth diver. And this bird is swimming on this sea in this world of nothing and dives into the sea, to the bottom of the sea, to bring mud up to the surface. And when it brings mud up to the surface, it solidifies and becomes land, and that's how land is created. And then from this land, a tree grows, and the tree pushes the sky up, and that's all the night up, and that's how we get sky. And then animals come from the rocks and the dirt on the land, and humans come out the tree. And that's sort of the main motifs of the earliest myth. Now, when that myth travels into Asia, many people in Asia aren't close to the sea and Siberia, so they change the myth. And the myth, rather than the world is created from the sea, they have sort of other myths of sort of the land is already there, and a tree grows and it drops fruit or whatever. But what is interesting is the bird, and that is that their world is then flooded, and the flood myths gets created. And in the flood myth, the bird is sent out to find land and comes back with it. And eventually, that part of the myth goes to the Near East, and when Noah releases his dove that flies off to grab branches from the olive tree and comes back, that is, in essence, the motif of the earth diver from tens of thousands of years before, just been reappropriated as the flood myth.
Wow. I'm curious because you've taken all this time to look back at myths. And I don't think I asked this last time. And there's obviously going to be a future. And where do you see myths changing now? Like, do we talk now are we going to talk about the internet was this amazing thing and is our new God and AI is our new God? Where are we going?
Sort of depends on what you think of as a myth. To me, academically, a myth is a story that has a sacred truth. And that's quite specific in the sense that means there are some people in the world that believes that myth is true, even if the rest of the world doesn't. So that could mean the Bible is a myth by all the people who don't believe in God. It means the Old Norse story is a myth for those who don't believe in Odin or whatever. The Australian story is a myth if you don't believe in a rainbow snake. So what the question today is there anything sacred today? Some people believe that many other people don't. And this is like the conspiracy theory thing. So you could argue that maybe aliens and Roswell is a myth because it's not legendary, because we haven't proven anything and it's gone out of existence. And there's hints that it is a myth because some people believe aliens are real. And you could almost argue aliens are gods in that sense. They're supernatural beings, not of this world. So that is probably the closest you get to myth. But who knows? Yeah, it's got to be sacred, but because there's the amount of people who believe in the supernatural is going downhill rapidly, I think the age of myths is over. And that's really quite interesting because it's exactly what people like Tolkien talk about. In his book Lord of the Rings, it's really a story about the world was magical once. And then at the end, it's all doom and gloom and the age of man and machine and that, and all the magic's gone. And we've lost touch with myth. That is a great analogue to where we are.
And it seems like when we talk about losing touch with myth, we also, it seems you lose touch with nature in a certain sense or some sort of flow, right? And that doesn't seem good necessarily.
Exactly. And that's exactly why I study mythology, is because I would really love to understand what our ancestors were thinking. Because at the end of the day, all these myths, many of them came from the same source. We're all the same people at the end of the day. We all have the same fears about death and the same all about creation and we all are scared of our own dragons. You know, they are the key myths that have followed us through for tens of thousands of years. And yeah, what were we thinking and why do we think that? That is, to me, is the beautiful thing. If you can capture bits of how our ancestors thought that was never written down because of that story, that myth, that is a real insight and something we should hold on to and wonder why. Because they experience the world as we would never experience it.
That perspective, exactly, is what drives me to continue to look into it, because clearly they see the world in a way that we just do not, or the average person does not. And we're not incapable of seeing the world like that. We choose to be blocked into whatever phones, the work, 9 to 5, or whatever it is that has pulled our attention. And you definitely just feel like you miss out on something like that.
Exactly. How many times do you look up at the sky? Yeah, you ask people to look at the night sky at the stars. I mean, if you could see the stars. But if you could see the stars, how many people actually do it? I mean, that, or just walking through the woods after it's rained or forest, and those smells and those sounds, or swimming in the sea. There's just some beautiful things out there that many people just won't experience today.